Hello, everyone. This is the Cluster PI office hour meeting. Today is Wednesday, 17th of March. And this meeting should be the CNCF code of conduct. So please be kind of with every other. We also have a meeting etiquette. So if you want to speak, please use the raise hand feature, which is where there are reactions in the latest upgrade of Zoom, and we can start with today's agenda. And I have two quick PSA. First of all, SIG contributor experience is started the annual contributor survey. I added the link to the meeting notes. Please participate. It is always a good opportunity to provide your feedback and to help SIG contributors to shape out the work for all the contributors. Second PSA is that after the talking with some contributor, basically I offered to do a code walkthrough on CapD. I've created a doodle, and if you are interested, you can sign up and record your time preferences. The deadline for the doodle is tomorrow, end of day, and on Friday, basically I will pick up the most voted slot, and so next week we can have this code workload. Some questions? I see a message in chat. Okay, two new message. Okay, thank you. There are people which appreciate the initiative. It is always nice. So last point, if someone has something in particular that is interesting to understand about the CapD provider, let me know. I will try to make it part of the agenda of the code work. Okay, so we can move to the next to the discussion topics, and the first one is from Michael, if I'm not wrong. Is Michael here? Okay, we can take a quick look at the issue.
I can provide some. Oh, Nadir, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can probably summarize that. So I think his question about whether or not QBarback proxy is needed. It's owned by, I've forgotten his name now, Branks, in his personal GitHub account, Frederick Branks from Red Hat, I believe. Who was at Red Hat? And there's a question about like secure software supply chain, which is reasonable. I think the question is, do we really need it? Obviously, we've got QBarback proxy because it's been included in KubeBuilder, which is why we're using it. And we're only really using it for metrics. So I think a fairly confident answer is no, you don't need it, but it is an infrastructure components. Yeah. I think finally there's an ask, maybe we can transfer this to a Kubernetes SIG zone project that should resolve the software supply chain issue.
Yeah, while that happens, like let's open an issue in KubeBuilder as well, because if this is just for metrics and nothing else, and we don't have metrics in Cluster API or like that useful metrics right now, so we might just want to have the option to disable it or remove it altogether for 0.4, given that like the project has like some security concerns as well. So
No, this is a good point. What do you suggest, Vince, that we go for removal and we, since it is not used now, it is not useful now?
Let's understand the impact first. If we are planning to add metrics, we need to find an alternative solution. And if we're not, yeah, you're saying like the user in Kappa, but if there is other ways to authenticate, or we can keep using it, but like it would be better if this project was owned by SIG.
Okay, I saw on the issue that there is a general consensus to try to get this owned by a SIG. Let's see. Do someone happen to know if this was already started, the process, or there is an issue? Okay, it seems not. I see that Joe is in the raised. Please go, Joe.
Yeah, so I had a conversation with Frederick a long time ago, actually, about converting QBarback proxy into more of a library. So it would end up being like a HTTP middleware kind of pattern. He was definitely supportive of that when I originally had the conversation, but it never happened as far as I'm aware. Would it being more of a library make this concern less, or is it still a big concern if it's just like integrated as a library into Cluster API?
I wouldn't want it as a library in Cluster API. It could live in controller tools or controller runtime, which would make it a little bit more sense given the metrics. I think the metric server is exposed in controller runtime right now. But so like what I would like to understand is two things. Like one, the primary use case to use this library. Like let's confirm it's only for metric. If it's only for metric, what are we trying to use it for? Because someone mentioned like we might use Kubernetes libraries directly to achieve similar thing. So if that's the case, like that would be probably a preferred path. The other path that I could think about is to talk with controller runtime maintainers to see if we want to have a subset of that of this project as a library to protect the metric server specifically.
Okay, so if there are no further questions on this topic, let me first thank you, Michael, for keeping notes while we speak, and back to Joel about internal external load balancer topic.
Okay, hi everyone. So last week I brought up the topic towards the end of the call about internal and external load balancers and how that's kind of a potential requirement that people are going to want at some point in the future. I know Red Hat are looking into this, Giant Swarm. I think Nadir mentioned that there was some customers there asking as well. So I started working on fleshing out a proposal in the HackMD, and this is very, very rough at the moment. But I'm trying at the moment to gather just the like high level requirements and use cases. Because I know there's already this existing load balancer proposal from Jason that's sort of like in flight as well. And what I don't want to do is end up with two proposals, both saying, yeah, we need to change all of this load balancer stuff at once, because it's just going to get confusing for everyone. So yeah, like that's why it's very deliberately vague on any sort of implementation detail at the moment, because I want to let Jason's proposal get through first and then build this on top of that. But that said, would still like feedback on the use cases and requirements stuff that I'm gathering in there and the explanations of those. One question that I brought up in Slack, which I thought probably warranted some extra discussion, was around the traffic sources. So part of this problem is that there's like, as far as I can see, 3 different sources of traffic in a cluster at the moment. So you've got the end user who gets their kube config. You've got the in-cluster stuff, so that's like kubelet, for instance, in the workload clusters, and then cluster API, so things like the machine controller or machine health check controller, which also interact with the workload cluster. If you separate traffic to internal and external load balancers, so external, like that was then be for the end users, the internal makes sense for things like kubelet, but CAPI could be either, depending on how you've got it set up. So like if you've got your management cluster in a VPC that's then paired with the workload cluster, you probably want that traffic to be internal and go over the private networking. Whereas if they're not paired or they're on different cloud providers, you want that to be public. So basically what I've got in there at the moment is we're adding some option to determine where CAPI should go, whether it should go via the external or the internal. Now, I've suggested initially that should go on the cluster object, but that kind of maybe isn't the right place. My thought for it initially going on the cluster object was that this is something we're going to want to be a common feature among all clusters. And that kind of seems, the cluster is kind of the source of truth for all of the other components. Does that make sense to other people? Do people have better suggestions or concerns about that particular approach?
I can give my opinion on that. It goes back to your comment. So it is kind of difficult now to validate one user. So in terms of use case, I got your point and I kind of agree. So in terms of high level user requirement, I think that what you're proposing makes sense. In terms of solution, so user experience, basically API, it is difficult to evaluate this proposal without having, without considering JSON proposal, because as you were saying before, we are talking about load balancer. So what really I care is that at the end, we provide a single place for the user for defining load balancer and their properties, and a single way to do so. And yeah, this is where unfortunately the two works kind of collide, and it really gets on my second question. So what is your expected deadline for this proposal? So it's something that you would like to get in V1 Alpha 4 as I assume we are doing for JSON works, or not?
For me, like ideally the sooner the better, but if it doesn't get into V1 Alpha 4, like not going to lose sleep. I think this is important long term for Cluster API, but I think the separation of the load balancer stuff obviously takes precedence, and I don't want to like block any of that by saying, oh, we need to do this at the same time. To me, this is it's kind of an optimization, right? Like it's not required, but it will make a lot of topologies easier. It will help our like external parties like add support for Cluster API and using the external cluster infrastructure proposal. So like yeah, whenever, but ideally the next 4 or 5 months.
I'm curious to ping with some folks here, like Cecile or Nadir, or I'm not sure who we have on the vSphere side right now here, but have we gotten like into this use case like in there, like, or have we suggested like other solutions to it? Or this is completely new and we should think about it from scratch?
It's new for CABZ. Right now, it's like internal or external. Like you just specify, we have like an API server load balancer spec, and you just like specify what type of load balancer you want to use for the API server, but it's one or the other. You can't get both. And Joel was actually the first person to bring that up. So.
Yeah, so the use case makes a lot of sense in the AWS environment because of costs. Because today, kubelet connectivity back to API server, when you have an external facing load balancer, means traffic goes out to the public internet, comes back in, so you're paying egress cost. So yeah, I suspect we will probably have asks around sorting that out. Starts to go away once you're all internal. So I think just having the option is definitely useful. And I've also seen it in on-premise environments and some other deployments, like on OpenStack, where you have internal cluster communication going to a VIP, and then the cloud ops team will overlay a sort of DNS entry and load balancer for the external consumers to access. So having that distinction, I think, will be pretty useful for lots of use cases, not just AWS.
One of the things I was trying to do while thinking about this was detail like how this would work for existing clusters. So like what I don't want to do is say, yeah, every cluster needs to have two, right? Like I think it should be a controller plane endpoint, and then if you want to have a second, you should specify the second as the internal or private one. And then like I've been trying to put in the document like what it means if you have one or both, and like where the traffic's going and how that's flowing. One change that I was thinking about is to make it easier for cluster API components, like obviously with this potential switch between internal or external, whether we should require the control plane providers to create two kube configs rather than one. So they'd create one for the users, the end users, and then one for cluster API components. And then that cluster API component one, it could switch between the internal and external endpoint, depending on whatever this value of the like option ends up being. Obviously, that would be a bit of a change from now, where I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, they all just consume the same kube config.
Yeah, Nadir is pointing out in chat that like there is already an issue to have multiple config, and I think it came out from EKS. So from my perspective, like given that this goes into load balancers, and like while the load balancer proposal is still in flight, like I would ask you and Jason to collaborate on having this as a use case, if that's okay with you all, so that we have one cohesive story all around rather than two going different paths, if that makes sense. I'm still fuzzy about the details if like we should actually say this is internal or external, or just say that you can have multiple load balancers and that's it, without saying this can be, and like having some sort of priority list, so like the first one wins all over, depending on like who the target audience is. But yeah, those details should probably go in the proposal. The last thing you probably want is to make everything a little bit more complex to configure. So
yeah, I did try and think about if there was a use case for 3 or more, and I haven't seen one, but if anyone has any ideas about why you'd want 3, then please do come my way, because that would definitely change the way I'm looking at this. Yeah, like I also wasn't sure about whether you want to use internal, external, public, private, like what the wording wants to be on any of this as well. I think that's something that, you know, we probably want to vote on or have some decision about. But yeah, I'll try and sync up with Jason at some point, and also try and help out with his existing proposal where I can.
Thank you. This sounds great. I agree on the idea on trying to make this use case be part of the JSON proposal. Okay, so if there are no more questions on the external and internal load balancer.
Fabrizio, I think Mika is saying they have a quick question in the chat.
Yeah, hey, this is Micah.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I showed up a little bit late and I just got the very tail end of the item that I added to the beginning of the discussion here. And I just wanted to thanks for taking notes. I just had a quick question after reading those notes and kind of wondered what was the status? Like, it sounds like there's just some questions about if the Q barback proxy is needed. I guess, are we just gonna, are people doing some research to see if that's needed, or is that, I just wondered where that stood.
I try to do to answer to your questions, and the other can correct me if I'm wrong. So there are few aspects to the topic. First one is Kubernetes is a nice project, but as you pointed out, it will be great if it gets under a SIG umbrella. Okay, this is one, and making this happen is, let me say, one part of the story, and we are trying to understand if there is an issue and how what is the SIG out opinion about taking care of this project. The second part is that, okay, we are using RBAC in order to protect the metric server. This is our current assumption. We have to properly to make some little more investigation, but we are pretty sure this is the case. Currently in cluster API, we don't have a metric, so eventually it even not necessary. But we are getting this because we are basically following what KubeBuilder is doing. So it will be interesting to move the issue in the KubeBuilder repo and trying to understand there if it makes sense to continue to approach, or if it makes sense to explore other approach based on, for instance, in library or methods that exist in the main Kubernetes repo. So the entire KubeBuilder ecosystem will get a solution that does not depend anymore on another component. This is more or less this.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for answering the question.
My pleasure. So, okay. Next one is again on Joel. Anything needed to move the external management cluster infrastructure proposal along? Please go on, Joel.
Yeah, so just wanted to chase up on this one. There hasn't been much feedback on the proposal for the last couple of weeks. So I did go, I know, I think Cecile added some concerns about how this might interact with the load balance proposal. So I tried to evaluate that, and I posted some comments back there. I don't think there's too much like interaction. I don't think it'd be a problem to go ahead with this as is at the moment. But yeah, if anyone has some time, it'd be great if we can just get some final checks on that and hopefully get it merged. I did also add a proof of concept for the like implementation of what's required for the cluster API repo, and I'm going to try and do a Kappa demo for it like over the next week or so. So might demo that next week if I get that done.
Thank you. I really appreciate the idea of the demo. I will try, personally, I will try to take another look at the proposal. I don't remember having a particular objection, so I'm not opposed to get it moving soon. But it will be really great to have the demo. Someone else want to comment on this? Okay, I see that Nadir pointed out that there is some work ongoing in API machinery, if I'm not wrong, with regards to allowing kubectl to basically patch status. So, if Nadir wants to add more color on this.
Yeah, it's basically what I just said there. So Nikita from our end did a POC on adding sub-resource support. So that will let you set status or scale from the command line. There's still some issues to work out. There's some internal bits that kubectl that need changing. It started off as a POC. It needs to become a KEP. We're interested in use cases, and this seems like a perfect fit going from what we were talking about a few weeks ago, right? So we don't want to have a controller that just sets status ready, without checking anything, but if users are uncomfortable writing Go code to do that, then this is an option for them. Like they can do their provisioning in Terraform, and then they can assert that AWS cluster or this external resource is ready for Cluster API to consume.
Thanks for bringing that up. I'll take a look at that certainly and see if I can add some comments around that for the externally managed use case.
Great, thank you, Joel. Okay, if we are done, there are no more questions with this topic. We can move it to Mike.
Thanks, Fabrizio. So yeah, I've been doing a lot of testing recently with the autoscaler and Cluster API and the CapD provider, because that's kind of easiest for me. And a lot of this is around the scale, from and to zero implementation I'm trying to put together. And one of the things I'm noticing, and I know that we changed some of the CapD provider several months ago, but things are behaving a little bit differently on the autoscaler. And I'm curious if there's a way to control what the kubelet thinks is the size of the node that it's on, or the machine that it's on. This might be a question to bring up with the kind developers as well, but I was just kind of curious if anybody had seen options around that, because right now it looks like every node reports, whatever the size of the actual hardware that it's running on. So they all look like they're, whatever you're running on. But it would be really useful for testing if we could create CapD clusters where we could define what it thinks the size of the node is inside of the container that it's running, so that, then we could, because the cluster autoscaler is reporting from the node stats what it thinks the CPU and memory resources for each node are. But we want to be able to tell it, to use less resources, or to be able to control how it expands. So yeah, and maybe this is something, we could talk about during Fabrizio's session he's going to host. But it's something I've been running into, so I thought I'd bring it up here.
Thank you. So I try to answer this. So in CapD, we don't have option to set memory and CPU. I'm not aware of such type of flags in kind as well. But what we can do is to basically add flags in our Docker types, and then pass these types to the Docker exec that we are using to create nodes. What I'm not sure about is if kubelet being executed inside container with memory limits will recognize these memory limits. This is something that we can test out. If you want to make a quick test, I can point out to you where to make the changes and do a quick test to see if it works.
I mean, yeah, that'd be awesome, Fabrizio. Like, if you could give me a pointer, I'd be happy to experiment with this stuff and see if I can maybe make a contribution or something. That'd be awesome.
Okay, I will send you a pointer in Slack later.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Daniel, up to you.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, this is something I was playing around with actually a few weeks ago, and I was wondering if anybody's interested. I had some troubles with it, but basically what I did was I took the tilt configuration and added the delve debugger to the various containers, and then set up VS Code so it was attaching to the debuggers, and I could create a resource and step through like one controller, and then once that was done with the reconcile, it would I'd set breakpoints in the different reconcile loops, and sort of get a guided tour through the various controllers, which I thought was neat. I did run into some issues, but anyway, I was just wondering if anybody was interested in that. I could come back and work on it a little more. So that's it.
Thank you very much. This sounds awesome. So I think that kind is something that everyone is interesting, because it is part of the most of the developer jobs. So I will be happy to see the demo, at least. This. I don't know if
Okay.
there are other opinions.
All right. Yeah, I'll open up a PR because I might have some questions. Just yeah, some issues that I ran into. It would be great to get some help. But yeah, I'll create a PR and yeah, figure out when to demo. Maybe I'll just pre-record something.
Great. Cecile?
Yeah, I just want to take this opportunity to say, if anyone has like cool things they're working on and you just want to show it off, I think feel free to like sign up in the agenda for like office hours and just do a quick demo. It doesn't have to be like very prepared or very formal, but I'm sure like lots of people would like appreciate like learning from what you've done and what you ran into. So.
Thank you, Cecile. So I'm seeing a question in the chat from Jerry. I don't know if you want to repeat the question to the audience.
Yes. Yeah. I was trying to see if the cluster API were in like able to connect to the like existing like a AKS or like a Kubernetes cluster, and without had to like recreate it. And we're just using the club API sort of as like a management like a cluster. So I see that this feature was like an experiment, like a feature. So I was wondering, was this one mature enough to using in the production environment? Anybody have any like experience at that?
I can take this one, and then Ace. I know you're in here if you want to add anything. So that's a CABZ specific question. CABZ has experimental support for creating and managing the lifecycle of AKS clusters. It does not support adopting or managing existing AKS clusters. Although I know some folks from Giant Swarm were interested in adding that functionality, but that's just a proposal issue at the moment, so it's not supported. In terms of like production support, it is an experimental feature, so it's an experiment, which means it can change and have breaking changes at any point, and we can decide to remove it altogether if we don't see a need to continue supporting it. So use with caution is the summary.
Yeah,
okay.
I think like just to add a little bit to that, the flip side is like the CAPI interface to it is probably not as stable as it could be, but obviously like underneath it's just AKS, so like that's not going to be necessarily changing a lot underneath you. But not all the features are exposed, so that's one thing to think about. But try it out, let us know, open issues if you find problems. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Ace and Cecile, for answering this question. So we are at the end of today's agenda. Are there some last minute topic issue that we want to discuss? Okay, it seems not. So thank you everyone for attending. You have back some time today, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks.